Big round of applause, please, for Dr. Freytag.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Matthias, for inviting me to giving a talk at this exciting event here at Pretzels. And when Matthias asked me talking about negotiations between startups and corporates, actually my first thought was, what can I say? Because the methods Matthias introduced an hour ago, they work. They work no matter what, being it a negotiation between 2,000 startups, between a supplier and a company, between an NGO, and certainly they work as well between startups and corporates. After 10 years working at Siemens with startups, I'm more than convinced that there are basically there's one topic which is of utmost importance: creating win-win partnerships between startups and corporates. And this is what I boiled down today, this experience, to those three key essentials I would like to talk about. What does it mean to form those startups? And before doing so, the first people here in the row, they may see that I'm wearing those casts here. And this is not due to the result of the last negotiation between Siemens and a startup. It's rather memories of the sailing experience from Germany to Denmark. Weather was great, sun was great, and a beautiful wind. And there was this large container ship passing by, creating really huge waves. So I have those memories from that great experience. Well, going into three essentials for startups. I think that startups and corporates can form great win-win partnerships. And this is true because startups are attractive for corporates and corporates are attractive for startups. And startups are attractive for corporates because basically for corporates, they are kind of a look into the future. It's about understanding trends, getting to know interesting people like you, interesting technologies. So it's a very important source for information. And secondly, it's certainly about developing new businesses. Startups are a great opportunity for a corporate to build a business outside the corporate fences, to grow it, to help to grow it, and then think about whether later on and how later on it may contribute to the corporate growth. And on the other hand, certainly corporates are attractive for startups. So think about as cooperation partners. So startups need customers. Some customers are very hard to access. In particular, for example, customers in the industrial arena. So corporates can be a great way into getting access to certain customers or getting access to certain technology or manufacturing expertise a startup needs. And secondly, certainly, corporates can be an interesting financial investor to act as an anchor investor, to attract maybe other investors as well. And it depends, certainly, but in the end, it could be an interesting exit channel for the startup as well. So, forming partnerships basically has those two ingredients. And to make it a bit more specific about these key essentials, let me take a little story to explain that. So it's about a company in Silicon Valley called FreeWire. We became aware of FreeWire out of my people sitting in Silicon Valley. They were participating in a business plan competition at Haas Berkeley School. And there was a guy, Arkady Sosinov, Russian. He immigrated from Russia into the Silicon Valley, and he was eager to start something. And Arkady made a very interesting observation. Arkady saw that at the parking lots of Google and LinkedIn in Silicon Valley, around 20% of the people at that point in time came to work with an electrical vehicle. And they certainly wanted to recharge that vehicle. But there were by far too few charging stations. So the problem was for the companies digging up the parking lot, spending lots of money, and in the end having those cars just sitting there for 20 minutes to be recharged, and the rest of the day they would be just blocking the charging stations. So basically, Arkady then asked one question: why is it needed that the car drives up to the charging station? Why cannot the charging station drive up to the car? Basically, the employee driving up to the parking lot, checking in with an app, parking lot XYZ, would like to leave at noon, please charge my car by then. And then the mobile charging station would come and charge the car. This was the idea. And Siemens has a business on charging stations, fixed charging stations, and we found that interesting. I mean, nobody knew whether this idea would be really come true, but we found that it's interesting. So we entered with Arkady and his startup to be founded FreeWire into a cooperation. Basically what we talked about was we would supply FreeWire with hardware and software out of our technology basis in order to help him to build his mobile charging station prototype much faster than he could do alone. In exchange, we agreed that we would be participating in his first customer trials at LinkedIn in order to understand whether this is an interesting idea or not, and later on to decide whether we would enter into deeper partnerships. This is what I call a win-win partnership, because both parties gain something they want. It's on an eyes level, and it is a very interesting way to move forward in terms of driving innovation forward. So the question is how to negotiate such win-win partnerships. And now we come to those three essentials, which I would like to go into a bit more depth today, because these are the three basic ingredients to think about to arrive there. This is the first one. This is the scale. For the startup, it is the scale for the strategic balance. The scale has the strategic benefits on one side and the strategic costs on the other side. And the first thing is to understand what is strategic balance from the startup point of view. So in this FreeWire example, the strategic benefit for Arkady and his team was product validation, getting to a prototype much faster than they could alone. A huge benefit. There are certainly other strategic benefits in other circumstances. For example, boosting the business by being able as a startup to use the corporate sales channels in order to sell the product or the solutions, or using the international presence of a corporate to go international, for example, from the US to China or something like that. And certainly financing is an important strategic benefit for a startup as well, because it helps to finance the seed and the growth, and maybe in the end, it's even the opportunity for an exit. So these are the benefits for the startup. However, there is no free lunch. Everything comes at a cost. And in the FreeWire case, it was about exchanging something. So on one hand, certainly FreeWire and Arkady and his team got the technology. What they had to give away was certain information about market insights, the customer trial. And this is what the startup basically has to think about. Is it worth doing so? Is it the strategic cost worthwhile the strategic benefits? And by the way, on the corporate side, it's the very same thing. There is a scale on the corporate side certainly as well. There are strategic benefits and strategic costs, and the same strategic discussion has to go on that side. Other strategic costs may be change of strategy. So if a startup cooperates with a large corporate, there may be, for example, a need to focus on a certain market segment in order to ideally utilize that partnership. This may be a strategic cost because this can mean that the approach, go-to-market of the startup is limited to that very market segment. On the other hand, it could be that this is exactly the information the startup needed in order to sharpen its strategy, that this is the right focus segment in order to focus on. So what this example shows, that something like focusing on a market segment, it can be a strategic cost, but it very well can be a strategic benefit as well. It just depends on the specific situation. A third example, I call it change of options. This means that it certainly, having a partnership like that, means that the options for a startup may change. For example, if there is an investment by a corporate in a startup, then certainly it has to be considered by the startup whether this limits the access to other investors. There may be venture capitalists who don't like strategics and corporates as investors. There may be the access to competitors of that corporate may be limited. So this may change the options. Same holds true for using the sales channels of a corporate. Maybe a great advantage, but on the other hand, if the partnership is somehow discontinued, then the question is how to unbundle all that alliances. So lots of strategic thinking is to be done, and investment is one thing, corporations may be other things, because corporations are easier to be tailored to the specific needs, and they may be time limited, as by the way this FreeWire example was. What I want to get across is basically that this strategic balance from the startup sounds simple, but isn't. And whatever I can recommend to startup in terms of talking to corporates, it's about doing that very diligently, because it definitely defines basically what the priorities for the negotiations are. So as Matthias said, don't negotiate if you don't have a goal. This is to define the goal. What is the goal? What needs to be achieved? And where can you give in on certain topics in order to achieve what you really want? So this is maybe the most important essential, the strategic balance. And if that's the case, then the next step comes. This is the negotiation starts. And then stakeholder alignment. So what you in many cases will find is that somebody is calling himself the key negotiator of the corporate, which is a good thing, which is basically the negotiator Matthias has in this system. And this key negotiator should have the authority to negotiate for the whole corporate. However, for the startup, it is absolutely needed to understand who are the other stakeholders in that game. Because whoever is involved in what you do with the corporate has certain interests. And those parties have certain priorities. And understanding what those interests and priorities are is from utmost importance in order to make the negotiation a success. So taking the FreeWire example again, there were two parties which were very important. One was product management and the other one was R&D. Product management was interested in that cooperation with FreeWire because they were interested in finding out whether there is a market in mobile charging or not. And so they had quite high interest in a cooperation like this. For R&D, they had to give something. They had to provide the FreeWire guys with the technology. They had to explain the hardware, the software, and do some help. So they had that cost them some capacity. Nevertheless, in that case, they were quite happy about doing so, because for them, the alternative would have been to develop something, some prototype, whatever, on their own, on request of product management. And they definitely did not have that capacity. So it was much better to do a partnership with FreeWire. This is a very simple example about alignment, but this is something which is in many cases not done thoroughly enough. And if alignment is not done at the beginning, it will somehow explode at the end. One department which is very important for the alignment is usually sales. Because in many cases, a cooperation between a startup and a corporate basically has as part that the solutions of the startups are sold via the corporate channels. And so this is helpful certainly for the startup to increase the sales. And the logic for the corporate is that on one hand, it may close a certain product gap in innovative products. And on the other hand, it may certainly cause additional sales in other products of the corporate. However, there's one major topic that sales may not like that, for good reasons maybe, because what sales needs is an easy-to-sell product. They need something the incentive systems are aligned with or can easily be aligned with. And they need something which is reliable, because it should be around maybe for many years, and they maybe need to make sure that, for example, the service is insured. So this is very often a point where the alignment is very, very important in order to make sure that sales really likes it. And then the question is how to get there. For example, one could do a little pilot in a certain region to start to build up credibility, and this would be part of the alignment process. There are other departments, legal, tax, finance, who quite obvious have own interests as well. So it may be the financial risk and opportunity. There are all kinds of topics on the legal side, like compliance or anti-money laundering and stuff like that. As well, this is something where alignment is needed. And what I see in those negotiations with startups, in many cases, is that startups, they often don't really know what to negotiate, what can be negotiated and what cannot be negotiated. And this is basically the third key essential. Know your negotiation space. Find out the negotiation space. Because for the negotiation to focus the time, the energy, and to serve and to focus the nerves, it is important to know what can be negotiated and what not. And there are negotiables, and this is the good news, most things are negotiable. All what's on the project level is usually negotiable. Because this is, if you have a key negotiator, this is what's in the limit of authority of that key negotiator. So this can be, for example, certainly milestones, deliverables. This may be other things like the financial terms and conditions for the investments, stuff like IP rights and so forth. It's a long list, obviously. But this is the important part where it's easy to negotiate. I'm not saying easy in terms of easily done, but this stuff is negotiable, and this is something the startups definitely should focus on. There is indeed another area of quasi non-negotiables. And this logically is the stuff which is more on a corporate level, because it exceeds the limits of authority of the negotiator, and this makes it hard for him to make any adjustments or whatsoever. So usually one major topic is obligations in the contract which kind of affect the whole corporate. So talking about non-competition agreements or non-assert agreements or certain rights to sub-license certain IP and stuff like that. Other things may be the compliance requirements. So discussing about the business conduct guidelines or the export control guidelines or anti-money laundering guidelines, it's not really worth the effort because it's very hard to change for the corporate negotiator. Same holds true for corporate decision processes. While, and luckily enough for many startups, meanwhile corporates have usually, like Siemens has, streamlined processes for dealing with startups, which helps a lot to make things more adjustable to the real needs of the startup. So this basically already brings me close to the end of our little journey through negotiating win-win partnerships. If you have in mind those strategic balance as the maybe very first and most important one in order to determine the goals, the alignment with the stakeholders in order to really get everybody on board, and to the focus on negotiables versus non-negotiables, then you are pretty well set on the way to go to form a win-win partnership, or, and this may happen certainly as well, to find out as early as any possible that the talks will not end in a win-win partnership. This may be not the most liked outcome, but at least if it happens early in the process, it's much better than it's dragged out. Siemens has quite some 25 years experience in those win-win partnerships, and we enjoyed it a lot, being a very important part of the innovative landscape, and it ranges from healthcare startups, factory automation to mobility. It's certainly global, and we do talk to some 1,000 startups a year in terms of corporations, to some double-digit number corporations a year. We have invested more than 800 million in over 200 startups so far, and just launched a new 1 billion euro fund to do even more of that. And I hope that with this little presentation today, I kind of made you interested as a startup to explore whether for your startup a win-win partnership with a corporate is an interesting idea. And I hope that those three key essentials are helpful to really form such a partnership. And in case that you're interested in exploring a partnership with Siemens, I'm certainly here for you to talk with you about that later on. This is the reason why I am at Pretzels. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Freytag. I think, listening to Dr. Freytag speak, we can get a sense of the perspective. In the beginning, Matthias, he mentioned our goal here is to understand different perspectives, and we got an extremely valuable perspective from Dr. Freytag today. We do have time for one question, and I guess this is the one that everyone wants to know. What is Siemens interested in? Who does Siemens want to partner with?
I mean, the nice thing about Siemens is that it's a very broad field. So and this is what I mentioned at the end. So there's on one hand, for example, the healthcare business. There, definitely all the things who have to do with analyzing data, precision medicine, getting more accurate out of certain data, point of care systems, stuff like that. This is highly interesting. On more the industrial automation topics, how to automate factory or industrial processes. The whole arena of IoT is certainly one thing which is right now in focus, Industry 4.0. So again, it's strongly a data-driven topic, but business models, how to do business together in this digital arena is of interest. And as another example, on the mobility side as well, data are important. How to optimize the flow, how to optimize the usage of certain mobility equipment. All those things are of interest. So it's on one hand, if you look at the spectrum of the Siemens businesses, all of them are interested in using startups as a partner for driving innovation. Most of them have certainly a specific need in terms of talking about digital topics, but there are many opportunities, for example, on a more hardware or hardware combined with electronics and software level as well. So this is what needs to be found out in the specific case, and this is why I would like to offer those who are here, start talking to me, and then I will help you to get connected to the right people in the businesses to really explore what would be the ideal fit.
Thank you, and I think that's a very, very valuable opportunity for everyone here. I don't know any other time that you would have direct access to the CEO of the Siemens Technology Accelerator, and Dr. Freytag will be here to answer questions. He will be also joining us at our booth, which is outside. So definitely we encourage you to speak to Dr. Freytag. We have time for one more question. How do you deal with unsuccessful partnerships?
I mean, you always start at the beginning that you think this will be a win-win partnership, but there are partnerships which don't turn out to fulfill what you both, the startup and the corporate, had in mind. And then again, as it is at the negotiation part, when you start the partnership to negotiate how would that work, if it doesn't, it's again a process to somehow find a way how maybe to discontinue that partnership, but still it's about doing it on a fair basis, on ice level, in order to make sure that both parties get the best out of it in that very situation. But it's quite clear, not everything works. I mean, this is venture, this is risk, and it's always about how to deal with each other if something does not work. So, so far, I think we have quite some experience how to handle those situations as well. It's always about fairness. Because in the end, you may later on meet each other again. And so it's good to handle those situations with fairness as well.
Thank you. Dr. Freytag, I think there's one really interesting question here. Does partnership need to come with investment?
No. I think this is a very, very important point, because this is why I put on the first slide, you remember there was cooperation and investment. These are two different things. And cooperation means you agree upon doing something together. You have give and take on both sides, like the FreeWire example, but no investment. And there may be investment on top of it. But this depends whether it makes sense or not. But we have quite some partnerships without investments, because they have a huge advantage. You can agree on certain things, doing things together. They are time limited usually, so you know what happens if the time is over, while an investment is a much longer experience. So it may make sense to combine a cooperation with an investment, What we as Siemens usually do not do is just an investment without any form of cooperation. Because we are not a financial investor as a corporate just to investing in something. This is not what the corporate venture capital, at least as it is handled at Siemens, is about. It has always to somehow be linked to the overall business. So corporations with investments, quite many. Investments with corporations as well. Just investments, very few.
Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Freytag. A round of applause, please.